Hi and welcome back to KITE's Python course. My name is Arman Shah, the Vice President and Co-founder of KITE, and today we're going to be learning the basic building blocks of coding, and today you're actually going to be able to start coding. So an important step in Python is actually downloading Python, but we are not going to be doing this in this video because for this curriculum it isn't really important to download Python. Instead, we use Replit, which is an online website which already has Python installed to it. But if you are an out-of-school chapter or if you're learning individually and you want to download Python, feel free to watch this YouTube video linked below. It's going to be linked in the description, so you can watch it there. So before we open up our Replit and start coding, we're first going to go over interpreters and compilers. So do you remember when we said that CPUs understand our programming languages and undergo certain functions with our languages that we give them? CPUs actually only understand one language, and that's machine languages, which are through zeros and ones, which you might have heard before. So it's a very complex language to learn, and not really many programmers actually know the language. So that's why people have developed human translators such as Python. So Python actually uses their vocab and their syntax and their language, and whatever we write to Python, it will translate that into zeros and ones for the computer to execute their functions. So there's two types of languages. The first one and the one we're going to be using are interpreters. So interpreters read the source code of the program and parses the source code and interprets it with instructions on the fly. And compilers, you don't really have to understand what they are, so I'm not going to go in depth about them, but compilers are more like C++ and C, and they are programs within files, and they have high level source codes, and that's translated into machine language. But we're not going to go over compilers. What we're actually going to do is we're going to show the interpreter side of Python. So we're going to actually open up a Replit. So we're going to go to the Replit website, and we're going to create a REPL, and we're going to pick Python, and I'll just call this the building blocks lesson. Oh, can't type. And it's going to load. So when it loads, it will have this source code over here. You could just delete this. We don't need to worry about that. So now over here is where you type your code. You could type all your code here. If you want to type some notes, you put a hashtag or a number sign, and you could write notes here. And on the right, we have our output. So when we press run, our results will come over here. So the first thing we're going to type is print hello world, which is something that a lot of people print. Like it's your first line of code. Usually everyone's first line of code. And when you want to print something with letters, not numbers, letters, you need to print it with quotations. So single or double quotations, doesn't really matter, but stay consistent. I like to use single. And now let's say we want to print a number. We could just say print 7. So that number 7 will be printed now if we press run. And let's print maybe 7 plus 3, and we're gonna get 10 over here. So what's happening is that Python goes line by line, analyzing each text, takes that information, turns it into the machine language, and gives that information to the computer, which produces a response. That's pretty much what Python does. And we can also store variables. For example, we could say x, let's erase this, let's say x equals 7, print x. Run it in our print x, which will be 7. If we said print x plus 3, it would print 10, because 7 plus 3 is 10. So to better understand programming, there's 3 essential things you must understand, which are inputs, outputs, and sequential execution. So there's also conditional, repeated execution, and reuse. You don't really have to understand this. Reuse is simply just the storing of variables, which, like we did just a few minutes before, x equals 7. Inputs, which we'll go over, and outputs, which we saw were at the results of our program. Sequential execution is just that line by line coding that Python goes. So Python goes line by line, and and gets an output line by line. And conditional and repeated we will go over. They're not essential for right now. You will learn them later in the course. So actually, we're gonna open up one program I made. It's simply a program that allows us to. It's a countdown for a rocket launch, an imaginary rocket launch, and I'm gonna run it and I'm gonna show you what happens. So when I press run, it actually, unlike the other program we made, it asks for a starting number, and that's because I put this function here, which you will understand later, is input function, and it asks for that starting number, and I'm just gonna put a random number. I'm gonna put 5. So that's our input. It's asking for an input. That's the input part of the building block that we were talking about. And think of an input as maybe something that you give the computer, and the computer with that input will make an output. For example, maybe in a website, an input will be your username and password, and the output would be that you're signed in into the website, and now you have access to the website. So we're going to put this 5 in, and we're going to press enter, and now it gives an output. So it's going to count down to liftoff. It's going to start at the number 5, and it's going to go all the way to 1, and when it reaches 1, it says blast off. So let's run this one more time, and let's choose a different starting number. Let's choose 10, and the same thing will happen, but now we'll start at 10. If we run it one more time, and it'll start at 15. The same thing will happen, but now it starts at 15, and then ends up at blast off, and it starts at countdown to liftoff. So same thing. So again, this is sequential execution. It's starting off with this line. It's asking for an input. Then it goes to these lines. This line we'll learn later. It just confirms the number. This line it prints the countdown to liftoff. Then it goes to these. Now this is actually both conditional and repeated execution, which we'll learn later. Pretty much what these 3 lines do is it asks for a while, which is a condition. It's asking if this number is greater than 0, and then it puts it in a loop over here. And if you're confused, don't worry, we will go over this later. And then it ends off with, again, sequential execution going to blast off. So now sometimes you'll have errors in code, and there's 3 types of errors. The main one is syntax error, and that's the error you will get. There's also logic errors and semantic errors. So a syntax error is when you simply have your grammar is bad in Python. For example, we're going to go back to this code, and we're going to change something, and I'm going to spell input wrong. So input is one of those reserved Python words that Python knows what input means. But if I spell it wrong, let's spell it with a D instead. It's not going to know what input means. Now I'm going to get a syntax error. So it's saying that the name over here, input, is not defined. And even this type of REPL is smart enough to understand, did you mean input? But most programs wouldn't understand that. But input is not defined. So it's giving me an error. But if I change this to input, the program will run again, and it will be successful. So the syntax errors are simply just that you maybe violated the grammar rules of Python. And what's great about it is that, as you saw before, that Python points to the exact line at which the syntax error was noticed, and you will understand these grammar rules. Obviously right now you don't know the grammar rules of Python, but you will understand them in the future. There's also logic errors, meaning that if you're trying to make a Python program, your program has good syntax, but maybe you didn't get the outcome that you wanted because maybe your logic in the program is wrong. And then semantic error is when everything was perfect again, but it doesn't. So they're very similar to logic errors. It's just that the whole thing doesn't really accomplish what you wanted. So thanks again for joining us in this Python course. This lesson was a little bit more complicated because I did feature some code you might have been unsure of, and it might have been a little intimidating, but don't worry, because in the next lesson we're going to simplify everything. We're going to go over those variables again. We're going to go over some statements, operators, and types.